Hello, everyone. I will start the webinar today. It's great to see so many different names appear over here on our Zoom, and we have many guests who have joined us today. I'm so glad you're taking the time today to join us on this webinar. I would like to start off first by stating that from coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territories of Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people. Secondly, I'd like to cover a couple of housekeeping items. For closed captioning, to access closed captioning, click on the CC live transcript button, and then click on Show Subtitle. For the Q&A and chat portion, if you'd like to submit a question for our presenters, be sure to write it in the Q&A window. The chat window is there for you to say hello and talk amongst yourself. It's really an opportunity to potentially meet other people, but also to ask us questions. Rest assured that any questions submitted when you are registered are those that are entered will be posted anonymously. We'll try to get as many as we can at the end, but if there are questions we don't get to, I encourage you to reach out to 1-888-664-1974 or visit parkinson.ca. Our information referral team is always here to answer your questions or connect you to the community. We are coming to the end of Parkinson Awareness Month, and it has been a fulsome month. Throughout April, and truly actually all year long, we've been highlighting the stories of Canadians living with Parkinson's and their care partners through digital and traditional media, working with officials at the municipal, provincial, and federal government levels to bring awareness to the far-reaching effects of Parkinson's and the barriers faced to accessing care and available support for Canadians through local programs and services. If you've missed some of the storytelling, once again, encourage you to go to parkinson.ca, check it out and follow us on social. We're over on Instagram and Twitter, as well as Facebook. We'll also be doing a wrap-up of Parkinson Awareness Month, so you will get that information digitally, so keep an eye out for that. I just wanted to start off a little bit. For those of you who may not know who I am, I'm Karen Lee. I'm the President and CEO of Parkinson Canada. And my first experience with Parkinson's disease was actually with my late grandfather. Through our family always coming together, supporting him, really got to see the impact of Parkinson's disease on someone's livelihood, as well as their family. Little did I know that experience would, really be impacting me here today. My career took me through an interesting path where I studied neuroscience, was really interested, for those of you who are maybe a bit more technical on the science side, I was really interested in how cells communicate with one another. But what was interesting, I was always at what I would call a lab bench, doing science experiments, and realized one day when I was actually working away at my thesis, I looked across the street and there were a patient group walking and building awareness for the disease I was studying. And here I was doing scientific research, and I did not know a single person who lived with that disease. It was that moment that I realized the importance of being able to engage with those who actually have the lived experience to really inform the work that I did. I no longer do research, but I take those moments, those opportunities, and have really built what I would say a career around patient engagement. And when I came to Parkinson Canada, of course, a big part of it was to honor my family members who did live with Parkinson's disease, but I also saw an opportunity to grow the organization. And I would say, remember that thought, because it has actually shifted during my course of the last 3 years and my opportunity to interact with the Parkinson community. And over the course of the 3 years, there's been things that I've learned and things that we have developed all together. When I first joined the organization, there were a few key questions that I got that really have brought forth some importance to me and the organization on how we proceed and move forward. One, when I took on this role and said I was joining Parkinson Canada, I had a very good friend who said, there's a charity for someone living with Parkinson's. He's like, I didn't know that. My father lives with Parkinson's disease. So for me, that was like, okay, there's a big awareness piece that needs to be built here. Secondly, get the opportunity to interact with a lot of our donors, people living with Parkinson's. And someone said on a bike ride we were doing, I do the fundraising, but I'm still uncertain, where does all the funds go? So once again, being very clear about where we're going and our purpose is really important to Parkinson Canada and our community. And lastly, if I think back about the importance of patient engagement, we do it in a variety of ways. But for me, it was really important to have a community I can always tap into. And so we developed the Parkinson Advisory Council. And many of you may know that short term is called PAC. I'm thrilled that many of them are here today to speak about their involvement and experiences. But I say, I am truly inspired, not only by the PAC, but the whole Parkinson community at large. And so with that, I'm excited to kick off the conversations we're going to have today with several members of our community. You'll hear from everyone and learn more about who they are in depth through these webinars. And I'll quickly introduce our guests, but they'll get an opportunity to also speak. But we have John Affleck here today, Caroline Thornton, and Liz Lowen, who are all members of our Parkinson Advisory Council. And they are members as well as the larger Canadian Parkinson community. The Parkinson Advisory Council, again, is made up of Canadians impacted by Parkinson's, and they contribute to our mission by ensuring your voice is integrated into everything we do. At the same time, I'm delighted to introduce members of a larger Parkinson community. So we have Dr. Thiago Mestre, who is a physician with the Ottawa Hospital and a researcher with the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute. We have Mel Dyson, who's the director in education at Davis Finney Foundation, and Katie Kopel, who's the VP Research Partnerships at Michael J. Fox Foundation. And so let's get this started. And first off, I'm actually going to bring forward John Affleck. And I'm delighted to share that through PAC, really got the opportunity to know John a little more, not only from the perspective of someone living with Parkinson's disease, but also his experience in his career. And with that, his career in marketing, in communications and branding has really brought forward a new lens to us at Parkinson Canada. And really talking to us today a little bit about renewed purpose. So John, I'm going to turn it over to you and wanted to ask you a little bit, over the last few months, you've had an opportunity to work with us at Parkinson Canada. And I know this is something that means a lot to you. And could you talk a little bit about why this is so important for you to work with Parkinson Canada, and perhaps a little bit about renewed purpose for yourself as well?
Sure. So as Karen mentioned, hi, everybody. My name's John, and I'm a member of the Parkinson Advisory Council, and I've been living with Parkinson's for about a decade now. And as Karen mentioned, my previous career was in global marketing. So what prompted me actually to join the PAC in the first place, and actually to get involved, was that, my personal experience with Parkinson's, as everyone's, has been not so easy at times, right? So in the beginning, I was a little bit in denial of the condition I had, and then over time, when I started researching it, I found there's a lot written about the science of the disease and what cells it affects, but that wasn't the right information I was looking for. It wasn't about advice on how to live with it and how to have an experience with it. So that really frustrated me a lot. And it was actually through attending a support group in Parkinson Canada that I found the inspiration that I needed. And Mike Logren, I'm not sure if you're on the line right now, but thank you for helping me, because you helped me give a new direction. And that purpose was actually to do something to help, right? So I had the advantage of being spending 20 years in this industry, so leading me to join the pack, and then subsequently working with Parkinson's Canada as a consultant. You, I can talk about purpose as well. So for me, having purpose is more than just supporting a cause. So I talked about my own purpose. For a person, it can be the source of inspiration for your actions or the motivation behind you doing something. Whereas for an organization, it's quite simply like why you exist. You mentioned before, people are asking, what do you give to? Where's the money go? What's the organization about, right? So when we started talking about it, I was excited to help sharpen the direction for Parkinson Canada.
Thanks, John. And I think when you talk about renewed purpose, I think we're all clear. Nothing has really shifted in that we want to support Canadians living with Parkinson's. But I think a lot of times it's like, how are we doing that? And what are we really trying to do? And so, John, I think I've learned a lot in the last few months from you and the perspective that you bring. And I think me as a scientist, first and foremost, I tackle Parkinson's disease or any other type of disease from a very factual, scientific way. And so can you speak a little bit about, that's important to understand, obviously, from the research lens, but for someone who is living with Parkinson's disease, what do they maybe want to hear first and foremost? Is it really what's happening at the cellular level? Or maybe it's what's happening every day? So can you maybe speak a little bit about that?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, a lot of information around like the disease itself and how it progresses and what the markers are now and stuff like that. But as someone living with Parkinson's, and I'm sure everyone else on this call would agree, there's a gap there, and that is the perspective of actually the person living through the condition, right? And having spent some time in the pack actually, and as well through learnings of all the great people that work at Parkinson Canada, and Lyle and Allison, a shout out to you as well. You learn that everybody's journey really is different. I mean, everybody's journey has a different path, a different scale, a different scope, and everybody needs something different. So someone may be worried about their future health. Someone may worried about losing a facet of what makes them special, whether it's their voice or something else. Someone may be worried about losing their place in the world. And these are real emotional sort of states that someone with Parkinson's goes through. And unfortunately, the belief of many of us, or too many of us, is that the condition and our life can't be changed. It can't be altered. And we know that's not true, right? We know, and I learned actually personally through the pack and talking with other people with Parkinson's, that even though I may not be living life the way I used to live it, that there's no reason I can't find new ways to live a fulfilling life. And whether that's through taking part in a program which is done by Parkinson Canada, or benefiting from research or advocacy, I think the big difference is looking at it from the side of someone who actually has the disease and being an advocate, and looking at it from their standpoint, as opposed to a scientist tackling, let's call it the side of the healthcare condition. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's a similar experience that I had, working in a lab, really tackling it at, I would say, a cellular level, but not fully comprehending or understanding that impact on the person's everyday life, which is really ultimately, at the end of the day, all the treatments, all the work we're doing is related to that. And we do it in many facets in different ways as an organization, John. But, we always talk about, if you're talking to somebody, for many of you who are on the call, I know you guys are avid donors, avid super walkers, or bikers, and are always raising funds or talking potentially to your family members and friends about, what you're doing in trying to raise awareness for Parkinson's disease, but also for Parkinson Canada. And it always comes down to, what is Parkinson Canada doing? What are we doing for the community? And Could you speak a little bit about the journey you saw us go on? And the best way I would say it in a term is that we can sum up the work we're doing at Parkinson Canada.
Sure. Well, we went on a big journey. The first thing we did is we went back to the beginning, right? So, what is the history of the organization? What has it done? What's it bring to the table? And we realize, obviously, the one of the critical things is that it's a, it's focused exclusively on people with Parkinson's and the condition of Parkinson's, right? And so that's a special thing. The other thing that we discovered, of course, is that there's a few things that the organization has always done. So programs and services is one big thing. Research, obviously, is another thing, and advocacy is the third. And what we found that was, let's call it a galvanizing point or galvanizing idea was, yeah, not focusing on the disease itself, but focusing on the people that are impacted by it and helping make their lives better. So whether we call it being a coach or a guide or a go-to resource, it's very much about the purpose to inspire and empower people living with Parkinson's and those that are affected by Parkinson's to thrive, right? And we don't want them just to survive, we want them to thrive because we know it's possible. We know that living well is still possible. And you don't have to face the end of your life. This isn't something that's ending your life. It's something that you can overcome. And just because you aren't living life the way you used to doesn't mean you can't have a fulfilling life like the one that I've discovered with my own purpose.
Mhm. Yeah, I and that really resonated. I will share with us at the organization. And as we have started sharing this, I think, and many of you, would love to hear your comments on that, how much it resonates with all of you. The work we're doing today and in the future is very much focused on ensuring people understand it is still possible, that it is still possible to thrive, even with the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. And regardless of where you are in the journey, it is still possible. And with that, thank you, John. John will be available for questions also a little bit later, but once again, thank you for your participation on PAC and the work that you have done with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you, John. And I'm going to switch gears a little bit, but it's really still focused on, when we think about ensuring things are still possible and working with the community is large. Delighted to have Dr. Tiago Mestre here with us today. And Dr. Tiago is going to talk a little bit of a clinical perspective, but also how we can all collaborate together. Obviously, Dr. Mestre, you are focused in on care for people living with Parkinson's, and you do quite a bit of research in bringing patient perspectives into the work that you do and the research. But Dr. Tiago, can you talk a little bit, first and foremost, how important it is to partner with the patient community as well as patient organizations like ourselves at Parkinson Canada?
Um, Good afternoon, everyone. Again, thanks Parkinson Canada for this kind invitation and I guess talking about research and patient advocacy and patient input. As Karen introduced, a big chunk of my work and my research work is devoted really to research on care and care delivery for people with Parkinson's. That has taken different dimensions, one of which is currently actually being funded by Parkinson's Canada, which is a digital tool that we call eCarePD. But one of the pillars of that research is really, it's really looking at what do patients want, how they live their lives with Parkinson's, and trying to harmonize that with the possibilities that we have today in terms of care resources. And so ultimately that it's care that's tailored and personalized to each individual patient, which is quite a challenge. But as Karen was saying, we need to start walking towards that direction. And I think these steps are absolutely necessary. If we don't hear the patients and the community, and even the care partners, I should also include, we will not be able to excel in research. And I have to say, by personal experience, that I've learned a lot with patients doing this research.
Yes, and I think the opportunity to interact, obviously you get that every day. And we heard a lot from the patient community or people living with Parkinson's over the last few years, specifically during COVID. We know we did conducted Parkinson Canada conducted roundtable discussions over the last 2021, and we captured key issues related to Parkinson's healthcare, both at the provincial, territorial, and national perspectives. And we took all that information, and I know, Dr. Mestre, you came and attended. We brought all the major movement disorder clinics together from across the country last November, because we wanted to address this issue of access to care. We know, and we hear all the time from the patient community, if we still want it to be still possible, we still want to be able to access care, but that is not very easy for everyone. Even if you're living in a major city, in a rural area. And so I wanted to talk to you or get your thoughts on why is it so important that the movement disorder specialists, the clinical community across the country come together to discuss this very issue, or what we'll call models of care, optimizing care. And why is it so important that it's not just the clinical community that does this, that we're working in partnership with Parkinson Canada and the patient community?
Big question.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I have to congratulate Parkinson's Canada to be able to bring different representatives across Canada into a room, into a one-day meeting. I think that's very, very important. I know Canada is a huge country. It's not only the geography, but the political organization with different provinces. And so it's not all urban, rural. Different provinces have different care models, different care resources or availability of care. And so by putting not only physicians or healthcare professionals, but also patient community and even part of policy making, I think that's essential not only to know the diversity and heterogeneity, where are the gaps, but there were the strengths and the common points. And ultimately, as I said, this is a big question. It's a huge undertaking because it involves our healthcare system, and not only our clinical centers, but the whole healthcare system. So I think only working together we'll be able to really implement structural changes. I think in a way it's easier to implement one change in one clinic, but then really what we're looking at, it's translated across Canada. And so I think it's essential that we work together towards that common goal.
Right. And I think that one-day meeting is really a kickoff of one of many to come. As you said, it's a really big topic. It's not easy to tackle because we have various jurisdictions. We also have, it's not just movement disorder specialists, you have family physicians who can be involved, health allied professionals, as we think about all the health professionals that support people living with Parkinson's. But how do we, I think one thing we are very much looking forward to and working with a group of stakeholders across the country is to really understand what is possible to ensure people get that access to care, timely treatments, and ultimately improving their quality of life, which is really in hand what we're really trying to do all together. I think there's another aspect. So many of you, on top of his regular job, he's also, Dr. Mestre is also the president of the Movement Disorder Society of Canada, which represents all the different domains for movement disorders, and Parkinson's being a large part of movement disorders. I know you've been hearing a lot from the patient community. We have as well. There's currently quite a few drugs that are not available here in Canada. And I know for physicians that can also be frustrating, as well as the patient side, because we know the disease is so different for everyone. And so tell us how you think we could be working from a patient community as well as a patient organization with the Movement Disorder Society to potentially bring the much needed drugs to Canada.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two situations broadly. So there's as you mentioned, the drugs that are available in Canada, and all of a sudden they are back ordered. Patients don't have it available, which can be quite disruptive for someone that's taking a chronic medication. And then there's the aspect of innovation and bringing innovative drugs to Canada, which I think all of us clinicians experience that when you talk with colleagues in other countries, and even again between provinces. But I mean, I think it could even have a greater impact if we think in the long run, and being ambitious, thinking that in the future we might have drugs that change how Parkinson's progresses. So not a cure, but definitely a different type of drugs that we have available. And so we need to make sure that if those drugs come to clinical practice, Canada is in the forerun of innovation, is able to access those drugs, right? And again, to do that, we know how is our healthcare system, and so we need to work together. And the Canadian Movement Disorder Society, as a professional society of all the healthcare professionals that deal or are interested with Parkinson's, you know, we see ourselves as empowering Parkinson Canada, because I think ultimately the patient's voice, I think, has much more drive in our government and in politics, but definitely coming together as a group, I think will deliver a stronger message. And you know, we've been talking about, for example, statements, joint statements that will be public, will be aware by the government that we exist, and we identify, we flag this huge gap in the care of Parkinson's disease currently in Canada.
Right. I think that's a really important message for all of us, is being a unified voice, but showing the diversity. We all come at it from a different lens. However, ultimately, it is about ensuring Canadians living with Parkinson's are getting the best access to care and also treatment. So we look forward to continuing the work we're doing with you, Dr. Mestre, with the work you're doing for the patient community, but also from the lens of the Movement Disorder Society. So thanks again for joining us today. I know you have a busy schedule. So for those of you who have a question for Dr. Mestre, we'll forward it on to him. Unfortunately, he does have to step off a little early, but we'll be sure that he will be able to see your questions. So thanks again, Dr. Mestre. Look forward to seeing you soon again. So we'll switch gears to another one of our other pillars. And I think many of you know a large part of what we do, and we've heard about it at the beginning through John, is through support of Canadians impacted by Parkinson's, as well as advocacy being one earlier, but by connecting them to information and a community that supports each individual journey. And I want to introduce you to Caroline Thornton. She is a wonderful member of our PAC and has been a fantastic ambassador for Parkinson Canada. And Caroline, would you just be able to introduce yourself? And I always find your, shall I say, story of how you came upon Parkinson Canada, a really fascinating one. And I'm hoping you might be able to share that a little bit as well.
Thank you, Karen. First of all, I really am happy to be here today. I love doing these kinds of things. So I was diagnosed with Parkinson's in June of 2021. And I have to say, the neurologist who told me I had this disease was, let's just say, less than empathetic. So his comment was basically, you have Parkinson's, it's a neurodegenerative disease, and you're going to kind of have a rough road ahead of you. I left his office in shock and dismay. And over the next 2 or 3 days, I remember this rising sense of anxiety and a sense that I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand the disease. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know where to turn. I didn't have any support. And I found myself literally floundering. The only thing this less than interested man gave me was a little tiny pamphlet that said Parkinson Canada. So in desperation and panic, I dialed the number and said, is there someone I could talk to get information about Parkinson's disease? And they said, oh yes, we can help you with that. I got through to a woman who I now adore. I call her my guardian angel. And I have to admit, I phoned her yesterday and asked her to watch this video because I feel so strongly that she is a brilliant representative of the organization. Her name is Carrie Lynn. And she's in Manitoba by chance, doesn't matter where she is. And in a very short time, this wonderful resource took me from panic, anxiety, distress, and trauma to a place of hope. She taught me how to think about Parkinson's as an opportunity, not a disaster. She led me through all kinds of materials and support things and webinars and information. And I can't tell you, she was brilliant. And I was so appreciative because I was literally suddenly in a place where I could cope. Made a huge difference to me. And since then, in the last 2 years, I've learned more and more and more about the amazing resources that exist at Parkinson Canada. And I don't frankly think they're used enough, but we need to work harder on getting people to know what is available and how to interact with these wonderful resources. As a consequence of my dealings with Carrie Lynn and my growing confidence in my own functioning, I became an ambassador for Parkinson Canada. And in this community, I started a lot of advocacy work actually on television, on radio, in print, at public meetings, meeting with MPs. And I found myself always talking to an audience that had no knowledge. It was staggering to me how little people knew about this disease. And somewhere along that journey, somebody called me from Parkinson Canada one day and said, there's some openings on the PAC committee. Would you like to join that? And I learned what PAC was. So a year ago, I applied to join PAC. And that has been a gift in my lifetime. I love doing this work. The people on that organization are brilliant and amazing. People at Parkinson Canada are so supportive. It's been a wonderful experience for me. And among other things, the words that are so important that John has used and Karen has used is still possible. And earlier this year, Donna Greening organized a webinar called Living with Adventure and asked that people who had an adventure in their lives could make a little tiny video, 2 or 3 minutes, and talk about exactly what John mentioned, which is the need to believe that you can do things differently that you may not have done before, you may now do in a new way. I happen to be, strangely, an equestrian. I've ridden horses since I was 5 years old. So I made a little tiny video of me riding my horse and playing on horseback. And I think that's just one example of showing people there is more to life than saying, I have Parkinson's. You can live very fully and do really well and contribute to your community successfully if you have the belief that there are good things ahead of you. And that's really a message that I think is very, very important. So I'd like to really tell the PAC members how much I love working with them, tell Karen how much I admire the staff at Parkinson Canada, and tell anybody in the audience who's not yet reached out to Parkinson Canada, please do so.
Caroline, I thank you for your kind words. I think the organization truly benefits from people like yourself, giving us that feedback and highlighting the wonderful work, as you said, Donna, Carrie Lynn, and that whole team, shall we say, on our programs and services, very much are there. They want to be your go-to place to ensure that you all feel supported. Most importantly, I think, and you can hear it in how you speak, that you feel empowered and inspired to continue to thrive. And I think what's really interesting is that, Caroline, you were talking a lot about how you felt supported. And I think what is also really amazing when you get to know this community is then you in turn yourself, you're an ambassador, but you're also supporting others in your community. And could you speak a little bit about how I would say you've become a little bit of a beacon for people in your community. It's not Toronto, you're further out and you're not part of GTA. And I don't even know if we would consider rural, but you're not in a large city. But people are turning to you. And can you talk about how important it is for you to also support others?
You're entirely right, Karen. At the very beginning, it was very easy in those first few weeks of having this disease to become isolated and withdrawn. But as I stepped into this conversation, yes, indeed, I found places in this community where I could be of help. One of them is the local support group, who's an amazing set of people again, and they vary in condition from people who are early stage and very recently found to have Parkinson's to people who are actually quite severely disabled. And along with that group, I've also become involved with running one of the Super Walk locations here in Coburg, is the community where I live. And managing the Super Walk event brings together all kinds of volunteers and participants and players. And it's a really interesting blend of people who have and do not have Parkinson's, or people who have family members with Parkinson's, and now they want to be able to contribute to their lives. And then the other interesting thing is people, you're quite right, Karen, reach out to me when they're newly diagnosed. And I have some people now that I'm mentoring and helping through those early weeks and months, because I remember the sense of panic. I remember feeling so distraught. And if we, the people who've lived with this, the lived experience, can offer them sense of well-being when they're panicked, then they will slowly move forward into a sense of purpose and a stronger ability to function well and continue to live with Parkinson's in a positive way.
And I think that is very empowering for those who are currently living with Parkinson's disease, to know there is so much out there you can be doing. I know many of you may know, are aware, we are piloting a program, just as Caroline spoke about, a mentorship program, a peer-to-peer. Many of you know about our support groups. Sometimes people just want that one-on-one opportunity to really get to know people, and also just have someone to tap their shoulder on, and to get some advice on, just who really understand what is happening. So Caroline, I can't thank you enough for all the work you are doing for the Parkinson community. And as I said, you do it with such grace and courage. And we really look forward to continuing the work we're doing with you. And I know the Parkinson community thanks you for all that you are doing too. So thank you, Caroline. At the same time, when we talk about support, as Caroline spoke about, we know there's a lot of resources out there. Caroline has spoken about that. We have many on our website, but at the same time, we know there's a lot of other ones around the world. And we heard very much that people really enjoyed the Davis Phinney Foundation's Every Victory Counts manual. We know many of our support groups use it. But as we talked about earlier with Dr. Mestre, healthcare systems are very different in Canada, but we're vastly different from the US. And the Davis Phinney Foundation is based out of the United States and is written from the lens of that healthcare system. And interestingly, we had a friend of the organization who was also a friend of the Davis Phinney Foundation, who really sparked this idea. He was like, you know, why don't you guys try to look at bringing Davis Phinney Foundation's Every Victory Counts manual to Canada and put a Canadian lens on it? And so that really kickstarted our work with the Davis Phinney Foundation. And so many of you are probably a big user of it and are aware that we do now have the Canadian edition of the Davis Phinney Every Victory Counts manual. I know I get great feedback on it all the time. It's readily available online. You can get a printed copy, and very soon we will have a French version available to our Francophone community across the country. And so with that, I do want to welcome Mel to this conversation. Mel, I know Every Victory Counts is a very dear product, or shall I say baby of yours. Can you speak a little bit, first and foremost, why was it so important for the Davis Phinney Foundation to create the Every Victory Counts manual?
Well, gosh, it was like a binder in its original form. It was just like, you know, a little binder with some pages thrown together. And we really wanted to have a piece of something tangible that people could, you know, obviously when they came to our office, walk away with something that was very tangible, something that had resources and that whole feeling of, okay, this is manageable. This is a disease, but this is also something that you can manage, and you can live well with it if you follow, you know, certain, do certain activities, see a movement disorder specialist. We just wanted to have, you know, kind of a map to help people through.
Yeah. And I think that map has been so beneficial. And I know there's a lot of testimonials in it. I hear from our community how by reading that, they really understood the importance of, creating your own personal, shall we say, prescription, along with your own, obviously advice from your physician, but how that was so critical for them after reading that manual. And so since the launch of the Canadian edition, I guess from your perspective, like how important has it been for you? And we're thankful and thrilled to be a partner with you, but from your lens, why is this so important for Davis Phinney Foundation to partner with organizations like ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, for so many years, we have been deeply committed to providing education and resources to Canadians living with Parkinson's. We did this through our ambassador leadership program. We had lots of ambassadors who are in Canada. We still do. We did this through our online webinars and events. We hosted the Victory Summit event in Vancouver, Winnipeg, Ottawa, Toronto over the years. So during those years of traveling throughout Canada and just working with local and regional Parkinson's organizations, we also were able to provide a lot of copies, thousands and thousands of copies of every Victory Counts manual. And so, but while the shipping the manuals was expensive and slow for some people, especially, over the course of the years, people consistently told us that they really needed this resource and there wasn't anything else like it in Canada.
Yeah.
So at the same time, we also knew that some of the content in the book was really only applicable to people living in the United States. And that was content related to insurance, Social Security, disability, healthcare, medications in particular. They were just really for our system. And so we were excited about the collaboration because there was a lot of the manual that was already applicable. I mean, most of it was already applicable no matter where people live. So, but partnering with doing a Canadian version, we've been able to give Canadians living with Parkinson's access to that information that's really specific to their needs and to your healthcare system. So it's just been a really great partnership.
Yeah, and I have to say, and we get asked all the time, like there's a lot of different Parkinson's organizations out there, right? And where I really see us as an organization is we want to make sure the best comes for the community. Right. And we heard loud and clear that this manual was very important to people. So why not make it readily available? Not having us recreate the wheel. Why should we when there is already a really good resource out there? And we've just been so delighted that we could continue this partnership. And I know there's potentially some exciting pieces coming through. I think there's more work to be done. And that's the thing is when we can put all the minds together, regardless of where you are, it can be really powerful. So I don't know if you want to give a glimpse of potentially some, I think we started talking a little bit of another manual potentially down the line, Mel.
Yeah, we're working on another one right now, hoping to have it finished this year and hoping that we can find a way to get it out to your community too. So.
Oh, that's great, Mel. And we can't thank you enough for the work you have done in developing this manual and being able to partner with your organization. Most importantly, I think, is to see the impact it's having on Canadians. I think that's what we're most grateful for. So thanks again to the Davis Phinney Foundation and for your work, Mel.
Thanks for having me.
And so the next piece is, as I spoke earlier, is dear to my heart as being a scientist. And at Parkinson Canada, we do fund into research. And many of you may know that there's also a lot of other organizations like Davis Phinney that fund research. And one in particular is the Michael J. Fox Foundation, who are very much dedicated to the cure for Parkinson's disease. I'm delighted to have a colleague, Katie Kopel, who I realized I actually said your title wrong. So Katie, could you give a little bit of a background of yourself? I know you too are a scientist, and potentially a little bit of a journey of how you came to work at the Michael J. Fox Foundation.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And it's because I change my job every 2 years, but I keep staying at the Fox Foundation. And I currently have the opportunity to lead our clinical research investments, which is where we've had so many fun collaborations with you. I think our backgrounds and journeys are very similar. That I started as a mouse doctor in a lab studying neuroscience and wanting to have impact and see how collaborations could move faster, how we could bring groups together for impact, whether that's at a disease understanding level. We're moving into therapeutic development. And so I've had an opportunity to work at the Michael J. Fox Foundation for close to a decade, and currently have the opportunity to think about how we can accelerate new treatments for people living with Parkinson's. And that means globally. So we can go in whatever direction you want to go in, but excited to share a similar role and passion as you.
Yeah, and I think Katie and I had the opportunity to be together. Now it's a few weeks ago in Washington, D.C., really tackling this piece about how do we accelerate treatments. And when we talk about treatments, we're talking about disease-modifying therapies that could slow down potentially the progression of Parkinson's disease. But I think what I think is really important for everyone to hear, and I think what I was really excited about, not only about the scientific side, of course, but my understanding, Katie, you've worked in this space for a decade. It was the first time that you saw 7 patient organizations globally that came together to discuss accelerating treatments for Parkinson's. So can you speak a little bit about that? Like, what was that? And what did it mean to you and your community and our community to see that happen?
Yeah. First off, thank you, because the idea has ultimately come from you and your experience that you're bringing in from other disease fields to bring together a global coalition. And it's probably one of the proudest moments I've had in working at the Fox Foundation and being able to have an impact on behalf of the community that we're serving, which are people affected by the disease, both patients and their families. I think that the story here is that there's been tremendous amount of progress in understanding the biology of Parkinson's disease. There's an opportunity for disease-targeted, novel, exciting, transformative disease-targeted therapies to move into clinical testing and hopefully can move forward into late stage clinical trials. The challenge that remains is that there's no consensus in the field amongst the researchers, the clinical experts, drug developers. And so every company that's trying to develop a new treatment for Parkinson's disease is trying to navigate this on their own. And the burden to be able to do that is very high. There's not incentives necessarily for smaller groups to get engaged. And I think neutral conveners like Parkinson Canada, Michael J. Fox Foundation, and our other partners that signed on for this are the vehicle by which we can bring the field together and can say there's clearer paths for companies to get involved. There's clearer ways for scientists and clinicians to agree on smarter, more efficient ways to design clinical studies and to test new treatments, because Parkinson's isn't time neutral. And so it was an honor to be able to bring an amazing array of stakeholders together. And we had a webinar jointly a few weeks ago. Well, time has no meaning anymore. But I think what's exciting, there were over 550 people that registered for this from the therapeutic development space. We had representatives from 6 continents, 26 countries. We had over 50 drug development companies signed on, and we had representatives from global health authorities. And I don't think that is anything that one single group can convene. And it's this collective effort on behalf of communities. And so this has been, I think, a really powerful step forward in a way to transform the Parkinson's field, to make the research teams more connected, less fragmented, and make sure that we're moving forward quickly on behalf of people who are waiting for better treatments.
And I think what's really interesting, Katie, you talk about, the importance of consensus coming together, not being fractured. I think this speaks volumes as well. I know from Parkinson Canada's viewpoint, and even when we just talked about the Every Victory Counts manual, we're here to work with others. We can't do it alone. And we recognize, there are people who are doing some great things around the world. And why not work collectively together? Sure, we all have our regional differences, but when we talk about a cure is a cure for everyone around the world. So I think it's not only about not ensuring there's no fracture within the medical side, the scientific side, but also I think for patient organizations globally. So I want to thank you and your team for the leadership you guys have all taken on this. And we look forward to really continuing the work, not only with you, but everyone globally to ensure that we can accelerate treatments for people living with Parkinson's. So
Agreed.
thanks again, Katie. And of course, research can't be done without people living with Parkinson's. It is so critical that we get patient engagement, that we have the patient voice, the lived experience, but most importantly, without research, you can't do it without patients. So I want to welcome Liz Lowen. Liz is a member of our PAC, and she brings a lens of lived experience to our PAC. And I don't know, Liz, if you want to just share a little bit something about yourself first and foremost, and then we'll dive deep into a little bit about the work you've been doing with us.
Sure. I'm living with Parkinson's, diagnosed about 4.5 years ago. And, there's a similar theme in all of our stories. After diagnosis, I had a little bit of information, including a really great booklet from Parkinson Canada, and started to do some looking around because I had lots of questions and lots of things that I was dealing with. Called Parkinson Canada, and the resource there was so helpful, and having the resources online as well, just a really good trusted source of information that was vetted for the Canadian audience was really, really important to me. So I started signing up for newsletters from Parkinson Canada after I had got my feet back on the ground in terms of what I was dealing with, and saw the notice for the patient advisory or the Parkinson's Advisory Council membership, and thought, oh, that's a place where I could probably provide some help, and have been part of that council since it started. And it's been a really positive experience to be part of that.
And you bring also an interesting perspective because you have a research background as well. And so can you speak a little bit about your research background?
Yeah, from a research perspective, I'm a pure academic, would probably say I have no research background at all, but I do have a PhD, and I worked operationally in healthcare. I've got a nursing background as well, and have lived on both sides of the fence now, writing grants, submitting grants, waiting for them to come back and the feedback, and also sitting as a reviewer, looking at research proposals, determining criteria, student grants, and fellowships. So it's been really interesting to sit on the side of doing that from a lived experience reviewer perspective. I've had an opportunity to do that twice now over the past few months for Parkinson Canada, and it becomes it adds so much richness to the experience. I think certainly the academics and the clinical leads and the technical leads take a lead role in terms of reviewing those criteria that come in, but the lived experience reviewers, both people living with Parkinson as well as care providers, bring a different perspective that I think is very eye-opening for the reviewers, and can give perspectives in terms of design intervention. How would that actually be for that participant? And could you really fit that into your life with Parkinson's? Maybe there's some feedback there for the reviewer on that, or this is really, really important to the Parkinson community, and it's so pleased to see it. From a personal perspective, it's been a fabulous learning opportunity to see what's happening in research in the area, and understand the incredible work that's happening, including that pure scientific bench, mouse doc work, as you call it, that is not the space that I was in as a researcher, as well as some of the more qualitative studies, looking at quality of life, looking at rehab interventions and things like that to help the life of those living with Parkinson's. I think the other thing that it helps us build as a community on both sides is having, we were often reviewing that layperson description of the study, and forcing researchers and applicants to put what they're working on in terms that anybody could understand, while they're talking for 2 minutes in an elevator, I think is really important, so that we can continue to foster a culture of investing in Parkinson's, understanding the importance of it, and having people really understand why there's value in doing this work and continuing to support it. So it's been a privilege to be part of that. And I know other lived experience reviewers have echoed that as well.
It's interesting. So I think it's a really important aspect, as you talked about, being involved in research, whether it's a clinical trial, but also this whole concept of making the decisions of where the funding goes and having a voice in that. And as you said, the lay, reviewing the lay, which is, I would say the scientist is the hardest thing for anyone to do, is to take the science you're doing and being able to explain it so the general population understands. It's not easy. And I think the value of having lived experience on these panels is to give that voice of, this is how I would interpret it. Is this what it means? And that dialogue that can happen, I think is really special. It's not every day we can bring these groups together. And I had the opportunity to quickly step in and see you all. So we had a few members of our community with lived experience who sat on this panel, and then quite a few of the scientists. And I know you come from a scientific background, research background, but I know members of that group lived experience did not. I know I don't want to maybe put you on the spot about this, but like, how was that feeling for them to actually see this group of scientists come together to really focus on trying to ensure that funds are being spent in a way that they think would scientifically advance our understanding of Parkinson's?
Yeah, certainly the feedback from the lived experience reviewers just in our informal chats was really not realizing the amount of work that went into, the diligence that went into reviewing the proposals, scoring them, weighting them, thinking about them, and then the level of rigor that they all went through in terms of deciding, because of course, there's always more demand than there is funding. And so the table really took it very seriously and very carefully to say, this makes sense here and why. And that was, I think, a really, really great learning opportunity for all of us. And sometimes those lived experience folks could really help frame a different way of thinking about it for the reviewer who had thought purely, scientific rigor, and then went, oh yeah, that's an interesting point too. That that maybe doesn't change the scientific and the rigor, but it does change a little bit of understanding about the study.
Yeah, I think I've seen dynamics of this where the lived experience brings up like, wait a second. What does this mean for the patient? And they're like, actually, yeah, you're right. I never thought of it from that angle. And I think being able to have an open discussion like that really brings richness to the process and experience, not only for people living with the disease, but also the researchers. And I wanted to really just share with everyone. I know you're a member of PAC, but there's an opportunity for people to be more involved on this research side. So do look out at parkinson.ca. We do ask for applicants to come forward if you are indeed interested on the research side of things, that you can become a reviewer just like Liz has. And of course, we'll have training. I know, Liz, you went through some training, and I'm sure Liz would be a great person to also tap on the shoulder on.
Yes. And most of the other reviewers didn't come from a research background. It just coincidence that happens to be, where I lived a little bit professionally, but it isn't, you don't have to have that necessarily to be able to contribute and contribute well at that table.
Yeah. So thanks again, Liz, for all the work you're doing with PAC, but also being really embedded in the research. And I think that's a really critical part as we think about improving the lives of people living with Parkinson's disease. So thank you, Liz.
No problem. And I'd echo the thanks from others here. Thanks to Parkinson Canada for really working hard to have that patient voice, that lived experience voice at the table in a whole bunch of different ways. I know it's hard to do, having done that on the other side. Yeah. And it's, I think, really valuable for the community that so much effort goes into it.
Yeah, and I think we're always learning. It's an iterative process. We learn all the time when we do activities like this, and we'll get feedback from the community on this, and then look to always tweak it out as we move forward into the next cycle of funding. So thanks again, Liz, for your participation in that. We are now at the top of the hour. It's 2 p.m. Eastern time. We've left some room for some Q&A with those of you who are in attendance. So feel free to put anything in the Q&A. I know I can see there is some great chat going on right now. We do have one question that I will push out there and maybe even get some perspective. I know Dr. Mestre is no longer here on the panel, but I'm also happy to answer parts of it and have others chime in. We have a question here that says, with limited neurologists in Canada to provide support to individuals with Parkinson's, Can there be more services provided to the family doctor to better support the Parkinson community? And I'll just kick it off first and foremost. It is something we are hearing all the time. And it is something when we brought a lot of the movement disorder specialists together and neurologists to understand, are they supposed to be that only point of contact? Many of you hopefully do have the opportunity to have a family doctor. How can they support Parkinson's, people living with Parkinson's? And once again, we're talking a lot about different models to optimizing care for people living with Parkinson's disease. We are doing it in some building ways first, and then we will be looking in the future to really ensure that we can pilot out some projects where we can look at the different models of care. So how do we support the family doctor? I can share with you, we're currently working on a project. It's called a care finder. I think many of you may be going to see your doctor and they may say, hey, you might want to consider getting someone for speech therapy or occupational therapist or a physiotherapist, or, join a support group. And sometimes your doctor or the nurse may take some time to look up who those people may be. I'm delighted to share that over the course of this next year, you should be seeing a launch of what we're calling the Care Finder. So regardless of where you live in Canada, we're hoping that you can put in your postal code and it'll pull up all those resources that you're interested in within your community who would understand Parkinson's disease. That, what I hope, is going to be able to support the family doctor who you may see and say, hey, maybe you want to consider getting some support here. They too can use this tool as well. But at the same time, I think there needs to be more dialogue, and we're going to look to see how we can facilitate the dialogue between family physicians, community neurologists, and movement disorder specialists across the country. We will look, I think Parkinson Canada really sees a role in bringing that community together, so that they do have those opportunities of interactions, just as we did with the patient groups, patient voice, with the researchers and what Liz just talked about. But we are looking to host an annual, meeting of minds that allow people to come together to learn more about Parkinson's disease and the care and what's up to date there. I'm just going to turn up. Do we have Sebastian? I have another one, and maybe I will turn this to John and our members of PAC, Caroline and Liz. Someone has asked a question, can you comment on support for families of people living with Parkinson's? So I'm going to turn to John, Caroline, and Liz. If you could speak a little bit about that and where they potentially could get some support there for families. I don't know if Caroline or Liz, go for it.
I think Caroline's talking, but unmute Caroline.
Sorry, Liz. I've recently come across a kind of unusual situation, and I'm hoping this can be replicated elsewhere. In the city of town of Peterborough, they have an organization called Seniors Healthy Living.
Okay.
And it's an agency that brings together a number of practitioners who work with not just the patients, but their families as well. Within that group, they have gerontologists, neurologists, physiotherapists, psychologists, social workers, etc. There's a whole team of individuals. They are working to support not only the patients, but the patients' families. So I think if we could find that model elsewhere or get that replicated more easily, it might be very valuable.
Thanks, Caroline. I don't know, Liz or John, if you have anything you want to add.
Sure, maybe I'll add something. So I think it's a very good question because also it's not just about helping the person, maybe we'll call the caregiver, support their partner or person that they're helping with their Parkinson's journey, but also realizing that these people have mental health and frustration of themselves, right? Because the situation that they're in can also be very frustrating for them, and some of them maybe can lose themselves in what they're trying to do. So I actually have seen in some resources on Parkinsons.ca and done by Parkinson Canada two, directly at the people who help others. And it's very much in line and very much in the scope of what we're trying to do, because you notice we didn't say people living with Parkinson's, we say people affected by Parkinson's. And that means their families of the people as well as the people themselves. Because at the end of the day, whether you're looking at like mental health and motivation and inspiration to do something, to live a purpose in your own life, or whether you're talking about a model of care, which also includes the people living around and with the person, or whether you're speaking about advocacy, which is about helping get a drug into the country, or helping get access to more kind of resources. I mean, it's all about the care unit for the person, and that includes very much the person who's caring for the individual that's affected directly by Parkinson's.
Thanks, John. I don't know, Liz, if you want to add something as well.
The other thing I'd add would be, I think the same resources that we've talked about. So, calling that information referral line through Parkinson Canada, they'll likely have some awareness of things that are local to your area. And even the books like the Every Victory Counts and Davis Finney often have components that I can't remember off the top of my head if that one does it or not, but I know many of them do have aspects of things for caregivers to know and understanding that role. So, take advantage of some of those resources as well to help you determine where you might go depending on where you're at on that journey.
And I understand too, we do have some support groups for care partners. And that's Carrie Lynn is already on it. You'll see on the chat. I'll share if you're not able to see the chat. There are care partner specific support groups, including an adult children as care partners and support groups available through Parkinson Canada. So if you are looking for that, please feel free to connect with our information referral team. You can do that through parkinson.ca, or you can call us at 1-888-664-1974. We have another question, and I'm going to turn this over to Katie, who really has a good lens, as we talked about, on treatments and a cure coming from the Michael J. Fox Foundation. Someone has asked Katie, are we getting closer to a cure?
I want to leave people with a sense of hope and also realism. Mm-hmm. We are closer. So I have the luxury of being able to look back at clinical trials that were happening in Parkinson's disease over the last 10 years, and we can look back further in the literature. The clinical pipeline for Parkinson's disease has never been more robust. And I say that with the term robust, meaning there are a lot of different shots on goal. So many of the treatments that were being developed and invested in when I started working in the Parkinson's space were focused on improvements to levodopa. We're thinking about ways to treat symptoms, which is also very important and can be transformational to people affected by the disease. But there are now a lot of biologically targeted therapies that are being tested, and I think they're not just thinking about one pathology that might be linked to the disease, but across a number of different biologic targets, neurocircuits, and neurochemical pathways that could help really address the disease progression, the development of additional symptoms. And so I feel more hopeful now than I have before. There are certainly hurdles in terms of getting those across the finish line. And I think this is where our partnership, Karen, with Parkinson Canada has been so tremendous in trying to reduce those barriers in clinical trials, to make it clearer on what a meaningful change would be for people affected by Parkinson's, not just what clinicians think would be meaningful, to make sure that the treatments that we're helping advance are the ones that would make the biggest impact on people living with Parkinson's. So I don't think it's in the next 2 to 3 years, but I think it's on the horizon, and the investments that we're doing especially through a global alliance, are going to make it easier for all of those treatments that are entering clinical testing to be able to make it over the hurdle of regulatory approval and make it into the hands of patients.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think the future is looking extremely hopeful for people living with Parkinson's. I don't think it's been this robust in terms of clinical trial pipeline. So I too am very hopeful, and we look forward to, having what I would say, a disease modifying therapy coming to market very soon for people living with Parkinson's. We have another question, actually, Katie. We were delighted to be in the room with you all when the publication of alpha-synuclein, which some of you may know is potentially a hallmark. In the brain for people living with Parkinson's disease. And someone's asking, is it truly a breakthrough? Trying to understand what are the implications now that we're able to, do a blood test to see if you have what I would say clumping of alpha-synuclein. So could you talk a little bit about that and why you believe it is a breakthrough or not a breakthrough?
Yeah, I think it comes with two flavors. And for people that have already gotten a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, it may have a limited impact on your life today. But if you think of family members who might be at risk, if you think about your own journey to getting a diagnosis, the opportunity to have more clarity, to have something that tells doctors earlier in your biologic disease process, do you have Parkinson's disease? Could you intervene early? I think that's the breakthrough. And everyone living with Parkinson's knows you realize that something has been bothering you, something isn't right before you go see a doctor. And that means that the biology has been happening for up to many years preceding the time of diagnosis. So I think for people in the future that haven't yet been diagnosed, that this is a really important transformative way to be able to change that journey to a diagnosis. I think it will change the opportunity to diagnose and intervene earlier. And I think for people living with Parkinson's disease today, this is a very, very important tool for clinical trials, that you want to make sure that you have a precision medicine approach. Are we developing a treatment for alpha-synuclein? Well, then you want to make sure that people that have an detectable alpha-synuclein pathology could be enrolled in those trials. And I think that's the impact also for people living with disease today, is that this helps make smarter trials, more efficient trials, and get new treatments across the finish line that then could be available to people with Parkinson's more broadly.
And in fact, what's interesting here, this isn't like the be all and end all. There's a lot of testing that still needs to come to play. But I think through the work that you have done at Michael J. Fox Foundation, who funded this project, it's now, can we test this out elsewhere too? So it's not just, this isn't a be all and end all. And in fact, I think there's a question about, what does this mean about the continuation of PPMI? So PPMI being a large cohort study that Michael J. Fox funds, we do have participation here in Canada. Can you maybe speak just a little bit about that? This actually means there's more work to be done, in fact, right? And
exactly. Yeah. It's the beginning of the journey, and the Parkinson's Progression Markers Initiative, or PPMI study, has been going on for about a dozen years. And so this highlights that science moves slow, but now we have a light and a path to walk down. And I think this is going to mean that the next set of research goes faster. So how do you make this, right now it's a yes/no test. And so this is why the breakthrough has a limited impact for people that are already diagnosed, but can we work in collaboration and focus resources on trying to make this not a binary test, but a quantitative test? So then you could say, is my biology getting worse? Is my disease getting worse? And having a way to calibrate in and have some more certainty about where you are in the journey. I think there's opportunity to then build on this in other cohorts. One of the limitations of the Parkinson's Progression Markers Initiative study is, while global, largely in individuals of Western European ancestry and Caucasian. And so I loved how you started the webinar acknowledging the diverse population that Parkinson Canada serves. And I think the opportunity to understand how does this play out in other populations is going to be critically important, and a very exciting next step for this, just the beginning.
Correct. And I think in conversations we've been having for the Canadians here, we do have what we're calling, it's the Canadian Open Parkinson Network. It's a Canadian version of a registry collecting information from people living with Parkinson's. In comparing notes between PPMI and C Open, as we call it, we have been fortunate to get a diverse population in our registry. So we are looking to see where could we potentially test some of this out also in our C Open network. So for those of you on this webinar who are participants in that, more to come there as well. The next question is one that we get quite often. It's actually one about, why can't the drugs get to Canada? It is quite a complex one. Our population is quite smaller. We approvals as well varies between provinces. And so I think this specific one is one we really want to work on. As we said earlier on, with the Canadian Movement Disorder Society of Canada, as well as with our patient community. I think we need to go forward with the unified voice to ensure that we're getting the right drugs in Canada and to ensure that you are all getting access to it. And so more to come there, but we recognize this and we are working hard from our advocacy and government relations side to see what we can do to bring more of these drugs forward to Canada. But thanks again for that question. And we will provide you more information as it comes forward and as you'll see the work coming through as we bring forward a unified voice on this. Sebastian, I don't know if there's any more questions. I actually wanted to, near the end of this webinar, maybe perhaps turn it back to John. John and I have had the opportunity to interact quite a bit and really appreciate his perspective as somebody living with Parkinson's. And, something he said to me, and when he described, and many of you heard today, it's not just about the scientific explanation of the disease. And I said earlier on, when I joined the organization, I saw it as an opportunity to grow the organization. And I looked at it from a quantitative way. But in fact, throughout the last 3 years, the opportunity to talk to PAC, to this diverse community across the country and internationally, it actually is that the opportunity is for us at Parkinson Canada is to grow the impact we're having on people living with Parkinson's. And it's really about the person. It's not about growing the organization, it's growing the impact on people living with Parkinson's. And today, I hope you can see, where we are as an organization. We really are trying to center us through our partnerships, through the work with people living with Parkinson's, that people recognize that Parkinson Canada is the go-to place. We might not be developing every single tool out there, but we'll ensure that you're getting best access to the information, resources, the latest on research, and that you feel that we are a partner with you in your journey with Parkinson's disease. But most importantly, I think what is really critical for us is that we are able to work with you all to feel inspired and empowered to ensure that you understand that life is still possible and yet you continue to thrive in your everyday work and all that you do. I'm excited to say, this may be the end of the Parkinson Awareness Month as we head into the last few days of April, and we look forward to the warmer weather coming forward. There is quite a few things that are on the go. I encourage you all to once again, either sign up for our newsletters, come to parkinson.ca, connect with our information referral line if you have any questions, but there will be a lot of activities coming forward over the next few months. Many of you may be aware there's the World Parkinson Congress, which brings together people from around the world who live with Parkinson's disease, their care partners, as well as patient organizations like ourselves. If you are heading out to World Parkinson Congress, do look out for us. We will also be hosting a Canadian night there at World Parkinson Congress, so more information will be posted shortly on this. As well, I'm excited to announce that we will also be hosting a patient research day. It is in partnership with the Michael J. Fox Foundation. It's called PDIQ. We will be looking to host that in Atlantic Canada, in Dartmouth, and there will be more to come there again on the exact date and how you can register and attend. As well, from a clinical side, we're really excited to be partnering with the Canadian Movement Disorder Society of Canada to host a movement disorder conference, which brings together everyone who is working on movement disorders across the country to learn more about Parkinson's disease, the latest, and hopefully ultimately support those living with Parkinson's disease. This is a really exciting time for Parkinson Canada, but most importantly, for our community. I can't thank you enough to all of you who are in attendance and to our speakers today. We cannot do this work without all of you. As we move forward with our purpose, we really want to thank you all for your feedback as a community, your valuable partnerships and collaborations, and as well, everyone in attendance today and anyone who you may know who is part of our community. I want you all to know that we'll be continuing these conversations, and we look forward to hearing your feedback, understanding where you are in your journey, but most importantly, how we can ensure that we inspire and empower all of you to thrive. So again, there are some questions here that we were not able to get to. We will for sure ensure that we reply back to you as well. If you do have questions later on, I encourage you to reach out to our information referral hotline, 1-888-664-1974, or visit us at parkinson.ca. Thank you again everyone, and I hope you enjoy your rest of your day.